change the way you age. Yes, you heard me. You can change the way you age, and I'm going to teach you how. I'm Dr. Tracy Page, and I will help you feel better, live healthier, look better, and improve your cognitive function. We will look at functional, cellular, and regenerative medicine, and I will teach you how to change the way you age. Let's get started on today's topic. Welcome. Today, I'd like to introduce my guest. Her name is Shana Hussin. She's a registered dietitian, and she's visiting with us today to speak about fasting, in particular, fasting to heal. So she focuses on intermittent fasting to help decrease insulin resistance. And this works great in patients who have weight to lose, obesity, chronic illness. And this is her area of specialty. Also, I believe she also specializes in the area of helping patients who have cancer as well. And we may talk about that. So she has written a book called The 5-Step Guide to Achieving Nutritional Peace and Reversing Insulin Resistance. The name of the book is Fast to Heal. And I feel very honored and excited to welcome Shana today to the podcast. Hey, Shana.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for taking time to share with our listeners a little bit about what you do and why you're doing it and what you have learned. So I was really curious to find out why did you get started in this area? As a dietitian, I've met quite a few along my medical practice, and very few focus on insulin resistance and fasting. So I'm sure listeners would want to know why you decided to go down this route and what were the benefits that you saw when working with patients.
Right. And I was very traditionally trained. So I just started teaching intermittent fasting and low carb eating over the last couple of years, and I have been in the field for over 20 years. So it was the vast majority of the time that I was teaching more of the standard guidelines, unfortunately, that failed a lot of my clients. And after about 10 years in the field, I started questioning things like, why don't I have more patients actually losing weight sustainably, coming off medications, reversing their disease? Why do we keep getting sicker and fatter, not only as Americans, but worldwide, those who are in westernized cultures? And, just starting to have this nagging feeling that maybe what I was recommending wasn't the greatest for most people. And I actually started having some of my own health challenges, and I talk about these in my book, but even in college and right after college, I had just a lot of bloating, and I had to work really hard. Like, I've never had a big weight issue, and now I'm at the weight that is very appropriate for me. But in the past, I had to work really hard to keep my weight managed where it was. I was one of those who probably over-exercised. I was running marathons and half marathons many a year. I was one of those people who, if I didn't work out 6 times a week, I was feeling guilty. And it wasn't always for stress relief and just to move my body. It was because I had to have that hard workout. So I didn't manage my weight. It was hard. I did it. Like, I didn't have a big weight issue, but I had to work really hard at it. And I thought, why is it so difficult? Why do I feel like I have to run 5 to 10 miles in order to eat certain foods or in order to keep my weight where it was? So I started to question things. And then at about 2015, I believe, was when I left the conventional system and thought, hey, I'm going to, try going out on my own. And then my son, who's now 16, got very, very ill in 2016 out of the blue. And it took several months. And actually, I have I have a podcast, and I have a whole episode on him, but he ended up being diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is inflammatory bowel disease. And he was very, very ill for almost 3 years. And during that time, I just started to do a deep dive, not only into nutrition, because I thought, oh, this has to stem from nutrition if it's a digestive disease. And I was floored by the lack of knowledge by the conventional health system with not only his gastroenterologist, but also he went to see an endocrinologist at one point. And I was asking them questions that they really had no answer for. So I took it upon myself, I'm like, you know what? Nobody's going to help me in the conventional realm. And I don't want to generalize. I'm sure there's other doctors out there, but our experience was take these medications. If they don't work, keep taking more medications. If they don't work, take higher level medications. If they don't work, then we might have to just cut his colon out. So I took it upon myself to just do a really, really deep dive, not only into nutrition, but other aspects, chemicals, other things that he might be exposed to environmentally, even his water. And I was just floored by what I found. And at that point, I'm like, I don't know if I even want to be a dietitian anymore. I don't feel comfortable recommending the food guide pyramid or my plate or, the healthy whole grains. And I don't think that this is the best route to go. And I listened to a lot of leading practitioners, and a lot of them were talking about intermittent fasting. And me being conventionally trained, whenever I would hear people talk about it and very leading, natural health authorities, I would just inwardly roll my eyes and think, how can you promote this? Like, this is not healthy. We all know we have to eat breakfast. We all know we have to eat multiple times a day. And so I was really turned off by it, but I just kept hearing it over and over. And I thought, okay, whatever, I'm going to just try it on myself and, not eat until 9 or 10. And it took me a while to adjust. Like I was definitely a sugar burner when I started intermittent fasting, but I felt way better and my bloating was immediately better. And I was actually working in a small digestive clinic at this point. I took some years off in the nutrition field, and I actually did substitute teaching in our school district. So I completely left the nutrition field. But then as I figured out how to heal my son, I went back to work in a small digestive health clinic. And as I was seeing the results from my own body, and again, it wasn't a big weight thing, but my bloating was getting better. I had things that were healing. I had canker sores in my mouth for like 10 years. No joke. That finally started to resolve. And I decided to try intermittent fasting on a small subset of people in the clinic that I worked at. And so I just did 18 people who were interested in trying it for weight loss. And I was absolutely floored by the results. And these people weren't like, 20 years old. They were people, mostly females. I think I had one male out of the 18, but mostly females in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who had weight cycled most of their lives and had pretty severe insulin resistance. And basically all of them who followed the protocol had really great results, not only with weight loss, but other things that I was not expecting at all. And so that's when I really started to become a true believer in the power of intermittent fasting. And then I decided to couple it along with lower carb eating and finding a carb level that's appropriate for each person. And the results have just been amazing. Like for the first time, I've now been in the field. I graduated in 1999 and finished my internship in 2000. So I've been in the field 21 years, and it's been 2 years. I feel like I've been like actually helping them turn their lives around and reversing their chronic disease. And it was about 19 years of struggle. So that's kind of where I got where I am today, and the shorter version of kind of a long road of getting to where I am now.
Yeah, that's really interesting and just really insightful because you got to experience yourself. Like you got to actually do some of these things with your son and with yourself and got to see the results. And I think that's where it really starts. I always feel like we ourselves are our first patient when it comes to healthcare. Usually we're trying something ourselves and saying, hey, is this working? Because it's really hard to promote something if you can't see the benefit or even feel the benefit in your own body. You mentioned a couple of things I think would help listeners. You mentioned, like, why was I always having to exercise and do these things to maintain my weight, even though you didn't feel like you had a weight problem, but if you slacked off, you felt like you weren't as healthy. And I remember back when I, from a family of 5 girls, and, my family made pasta a lot. So my mom would make pasta and I would sit next to my sister and she would be able to eat like everything on her plate, the spaghetti, the corn. My mom would have spaghetti, corn. She'd make a salad and she'd have garlic bread. And my sister would eat all of it and she wouldn't gain a pound. And I would eat it and I would be like, I would pay for it for the next 3 or 4 days. Like I would be bloated and I would just put on weight really easy. And I used to always ask myself that same question: why do I have to work so hard to maintain my weight, or why can't I eat the same thing someone else is eating? And so I think the reason I bring that up is because it leads to that term sugar burner. And then you had mentioned the term insulin resistance. So just for our listeners for those who may not be aware of fasting and aware of some of these terms, can you explain to them what a sugar burner is, and also why you focus on decreasing insulin resistance? Like, what is that, so that listeners could understand from a dietitian standpoint?
Sure. And so, our bodies basically have 2 fueling systems. We can fuel ourselves and run on and burn energy with sugar or glucose, or we can transition and run on fat and burn ketones for energy. And in the American culture, a lot of us really have not burned ketones or fatty acids in maybe our whole lifetime since we were babies. So breast milk's really high in fat, and babies are burning ketones a lot of the time. But once you transition out of, breast milk or even formula, a lot of people have not burned fatty acids in a very long time. So when I explain it to people, I like to explain it kind of like a hybrid car, where hybrid cars can run on either gas or they can run on electricity. And I shouldn't say older cars, but other cars can only burn gas, right? Like most traditional cars. So that's kind of how I like to think about it. It's like when you're only putting one certain fuel in your tank, and that being like a high carbohydrate diet or eating very frequently, your body's always able to run on glucose because there's a fueling source. So if you have like a finite amount of glycogen or glucose storage, I don't want to get too technical, but your body can store a finite amount of glucose in the form of glycogen, and it's stored in our muscle tissues and our livers. And your body likes to use that first if it's available, because it's easier to convert. It's steadily available. Your body, if you're not eating carbohydrates, your body will just release them into the bloodstream and it's not as much work. And so that's kind of like gas in the tank. Like, okay, well, there's always glycogen here. There's always glucose here. I'm going to burn this for energy. Whereas if you're more like a hybrid car where you're having to, you burn through your gas, it's like, now what? Now what fuel am I going to use? And that's kind of like going to the electric part of the car where your body says, okay, I don't have any glucose stored. I don't have any glucose or energy coming in. I have to find a different fueling system. And that's where your body's like, okay, maybe there's a little bit of protein I can use here. But again, this is I don't want to go off topic, but your body will utilize protein and convert it to glucose as well in a process called gluconeogenesis. But it will then transition to looking for fatty acids. And so that's where the intermittent fasting comes in and lowering the insulin level. Because if we're not eating all the time, and we're not eating a high level of carbohydrates, your body is forced to go and use a different fueling system. And sometimes that can be a bit of a transition for the body if it's always been used to having a steady stream of calories coming in, and I shouldn't say calories, carbohydrate coming in, and always has the storage available to it. But if it's not, it's going to say, okay, now I have to go burn fatty acids. And it's kind of like either going to the electric part of the car, or even like having to go almost to like the deep freezer of your body and say, okay, I have to mobilize some fats because there's no energy coming in. And like I said, that transition time can take a little bit of time, and you might feel kind of sluggish because your body, like I said, will always use glucose first if it's available. It's just if you give your body a chance to use ketone bodies or fats, it will in time transition. And how we do that is, and what I teach is to lower the overall carbohydrate load and get rid of processed foods and packaged foods that are high insulin stimulators, because most people, how they get insulin resistance is because they're eating too often and they're eating the wrong types of foods. And whenever we eat, and when we eat carbohydrates especially, your body releases insulin to tell that energy to go into the cell. So if you're eating the most recent study shows that people eat 17 to 23 times throughout the day between drinking and eating, whether it's, a handful of nuts or whatever it is. Your body's then going to release insulin to get that energy into the cell. And so what happens is, we need insulin. It's critical for survival. But when we eat too often and we're overstimulating our pancreas to produce insulin, as your cells kind of get sick of it. It's like, oh my gosh, you again? Like, you just released insulin. I don't need this insulin. And so the glucose sits in the blood, the insulin is continually released. The pancreas gets really, really tired. And over time, insulin levels remain high all the time. The problem with that is insulin's telling your body to store energy. And we want to burn energy if we're overweight, right? Like we want to be like, okay, that extra body fat is here for a reason. It's not just like, oh, I love how it looks on my hips and stomachs. Like I want to get rid of that. So how do we do that? We bring our insulin levels down, because when our insulin levels are low, we're allowed to burn body fat. So unless you understand the science behind it, fasting really seems pretty crazy. But once you understand the simple concepts of, okay, we're working to bring insulin levels down by reducing carbohydrate intakes and going longer periods of time without eating to give us a gut rest, give our pancreas rest, because a lot of times our pancreases are so overworked because we eat too often, and the pancreas releases insulin. That will allow you to burn fat, because you can't store fat and burn fat at the same time. And that's all dictated by hormones. So yeah, it's learning to, take a kind of a complex system or complex concept and breaking it down, and just once you understand it in simpler terms, it really makes a lot of sense as to why it helps with not only weight loss, but reversing insulin resistance.
Yes, totally. And also too it's interesting because I always tell patients that I see in my practice, I think of your fat is like in a freezer. So the extra fat that you have on your body is kind of the frozen food. And I'm like, insulin's the lock on the freezer door. And I'm like, if you never take the lock off, which is never lower our insulin, we can never tap into the freezer. And I also talk to them about eating. And I say, when you're eating, if you're always filling the fridge with food, which is putting the food in your mouth, you never have a reason to tap into the freezer to get the food out, the excess. And so I try to use that kind of term to help them understand what we're trying to do with the fasting, and then getting insulin to go down is kind of like the lock on the door. And when I think, like you were saying, when you break it down into simpler terms, I try to help my patients understand it's hormonal weight loss, because a lot of them will come in and they're like you were saying in the beginning, they're exercising like crazy and, they're not really seeing much change in their weight, and they're wondering why is my weight not changing? And a lot of that is because, it's a hormonal weight loss. It's not really a calories in, calories out, which so many patients get hooked on. And then they don't understand why they're not losing weight. And also they're usually increasing their inflammation with all that exercise because they're tearing down their body constantly. So I've seen that as well. Yeah. So great explanation. Thank you for sharing that. I think that will help a lot of people understand. The other thing I was going to ask you is, so you work with a lot of individuals, and I had been reading through your book, and you start out with giving them some fasting schedules, and you talk about the 1 meal a day and some of the things about how change is key. And so I just wanted you to, if we have a listener listening now who's interested in maybe trying intermittent fasting, what kind of things could you give them, like some tips and tricks that you would give them starting out that you notice of things that patients struggle with?
Yeah, the first step in my book. So the subtitle is Finding Nutritional Peace, and that peace is an acronym for 5 steps. And the first step is all about preparing your body. And I have people, when I work with them individually, or if they go through my online program, I always have them, all of them, do the same thing in that prepare mode, because it's so important. The last thing you want to do, especially if you're a sugar burner, is say, I'm going to do a 24-hour fast today. And you've never fasted a day in your life, or you've never gone without eating breakfast, or you're eating the standard American diet, the SAD diet. There's definitely a transition time. But I always start with doing 3 things with every client. I recommend them to stop snacking in between meals, so that will let your insulin levels fall in between meals. I recommend them to stop eating about 3 hours before bed, because that will naturally extend the time that you're fasting and not eating. And it's way easier to fast overnight because you're naturally fasting, so extending it during the nighttime, so not eating before bed. And then to just start slowly pushing that time back in the morning, or in the mid-morning to afternoon, that you actually break your fast. So we all eat breakfast per se. It's just some of us might break our fast at noon, some at 2. But I have people start inching it back by about an hour for 2-3 days, see how they do, and then just inch it back more and more. But the different types of fasting, like I know you brought up OMAD and 1 meal a day, and I have all the different types of fasting in the book. But when I work with clients, either in my online program or individually, obviously they're filling out an intake form, so I can see where they're at and see, are you brand new to fasting? Have you done it for a while? What are your health goals? What's your past history? Because I think that's so important to look at, because if it's somebody who's struggled with 20 years of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or versus somebody who's looking more for longevity and weight maintenance, I'm going to give them a different protocol based on what their goals are and what their history is and how they want to progress. So all of those things are important, but definitely I always have people start in the preparation mode with getting the processed convenience and packaged foods out of their diet, because they're the highest stimulators of insulin, and then adapting the no snacking, avoiding eating at least 3 hours before bed, and then slowly pushing that time back in the morning. Because every fasting protocol, you have to play around with it for a little bit. Like, I can't say everybody should do a 16-8 where they're fasting 16 hours and eating 8 hours. That might not work for some people who have a higher level of insulin resistance or stubborn insulin resistance, where the next person might adapt a 16-8 and the weight just falls off and everything is hunky-dory. It's like, it just depends on the person. And that's where working with a practitioner individually can be very helpful, because they can help you with strategies if you're getting stuck and implementing different things that you might not have tried in the past.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I think that's where it can be really helpful, because we don't know what we don't know. And I always say it's difficult to lift a board you're standing on. And we're typically, when we're looking at ourselves, we're standing on that board and we can't always see, oh, you could just change this. I know with my patients, like sometimes they'll be doing a 16-8, or their eating window will be like a 6 hour. So they may do an 18-6 or something, but they won't be losing. And all I'll do is encourage them or suggest that they switch their fasting fasting times. And so they may eat in the morning now and fast at nighttime for the majority of their fast rather than having dinner as their one meal. And that can make a huge difference, and they'll drop like 5 pounds just by changing it. So yeah, so just those, and sometimes it's just having another set of eyes that can see things a little bit clearer because you're not in it is very helpful. So I highly recommend working with a practitioner. So you gave us two of your P's. You gave us prepare your body and then extend your fast. Wherever you start them, you slowly extend them. And then why don't you go ahead and share the A, C, and E? So alter nutrition, and then the clean, challenge, and change, and ease your mind. I'm sure everyone would love to hear what P stands for.
Yeah, thanks. So P is prepare your body, E is extend fast, and finding the right protocol, fasting protocol that works for you now. That might not always be the same. It might change over time. And then A is for alter nutrition. So that's where in my programs, and I do an online version of a whole 6-week program, but that is where we take a look, like we do a deeper dive in nutrition, because sometimes people think, okay, as long as I'm fasting, I can eat whatever I want during my eating window, or I can snack my way through it, or they're following a protocol that might work for their best friend or their significant other, but it's not working for them. So that's where we do a deeper dive in nutrition and say, okay, if we're not seeing progress, what can we change? What kind of fuel are we putting into our body that's maybe not appropriate for that person? And so we take a deeper dive and ask a lot of questions about how we can change nutrition to work for that person. And I totally agree with changing up the times that you're fasting too, because I think a lot of people think they can't eat until late in the day, whereas a lot of the more recent literature shows that eating earlier in the day and then fasting more into the evening can be very beneficial. But then the C stands for clean, challenge, and change. So that's where we look at, are you doing a clean fast? Do you need to add in some challenge days? Because again, sometimes that insulin resistance can be very stubborn, and just adding in one challenge day a week where maybe you do a 24-hour fast, or you do overnight into a 36-hour fast, and then shorter fasting times other days can be very helpful. That's where we call that, if it's 24 to 36 hours of fasting once or twice a week, we call that the therapeutic level of fasting. And so that will generally help a lot of people. So we look at that. And again, you don't have to do that forever. You are just healing the hormonal systems, and once you're healed, your body can be a lot more sensitive to both insulin and the food that you're taking in. So we look at clean fasting, challenge days, and clean, challenge, and change, and changing things up. So making sure that we're not following the exact same protocol from day to day and week to week, because your body adapts very quickly, and change throws it off and makes you adapt. So it makes you stronger, and oftentimes will stimulate weight loss. And then ease your mind is where we talk about stress management and sleeping and other things that might be coming into play, not only what you're eating and how much activity you're getting, but is your sleep managed? Is your stress managed? All of those things can throw off not only weight loss, but just progressing and healing in the way that your body needs to, if those two things are messed up. And we also talk about like breaking through plateaus. If you're in a plateau, which most people are going to have at some point in time, how you can deal with that and break through that. Yeah. So that's the PEACE acronym.
Yeah. And it's so easy for patients to understand when you break it out like that. I love that because, I get so many patients in my office that, they're so ready to lose weight. They want to understand why they're not losing weight, but then they feel very overwhelmed, just getting started. And like most things, they've tried probably, 7 different approaches. And so having a, stepwise approach, I think is very wise and very insightful because it gives them something. I always tell them it's not where you are now or where you want to go, the weight that you want to get to, if we're looking at it for weight loss, it's really what you learn between here and there that's most important, and also what's going to benefit you long term so that you're not in this position again where you have to revisit insulin resistance and weight loss and, healthy changes. So I think it's so great that you have put it in an acronym for them to follow and understand that there's multiple steps to achieving the health goal that you're striving for. And what I love about fasting is not just about weight loss, as you mentioned earlier. It's about decreasing inflammation. It's about giving the gut a rest and having better gut health. And also too, is I have found with patients, one of the hardest things to do is, so not eating is really easy. I mean, you don't have to pack anything. You don't have to prepare anything. It's like one of the easiest things ever that you could do for a weight loss program. And yet patients struggle with it because they don't realize that we eat for every other reason than hunger. We eat for boredom and for procrastination and when we're happy and when we're sad and when it's someone's birthday and we want to celebrate. And, the list goes on and your emotions. And I think I was an emotional eater before I really tapped into how we eat and why we eat. And so I'm a big fan of, really finding joy, purpose, and meaning outside of just food. And so I don't know, do you ever come up with that with your clients? Like they don't know what to do with themselves because they're not eating to fill a void or to fill an emotion?
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, most people are eating for every reason other than hunger. And that's what I love about intermittent fasting and fasting protocols in general, is that healing that hormonal system. So when you heal insulin, which is kind of one of the big master hormones in our body, all of your hormones will talk better to each other. They're basically like little messengers sending messages all over the body. And when you heal the insulin, all of the hormones work better and talk better. So there's two major or other hormones that are produced more in the stomach, and those are leptin and ghrelin. And those two tell your body, like, I'm really hungry or I'm full. And those can be very unbalanced if insulin levels are high all the time. So intermittent fasting just teaches you to work with your hormones instead of against them. And it heals the entire endocrine and hormonal system. So I always tell my clients I would love to be able to send everybody the message to be an intuitive eater and to eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. But when your hormones are not balanced, you can't trust them necessarily. So for example, if your insulin level's running high all the time and you're listening to your body that it's hungry, well, you're going to want to eat all the time because insulin is basically telling you to eat because it wants to get rid of the insulin and it needs more energy. So you can't necessarily trust it until those hormonal systems are healed. And then the ghrelin and the leptin are thrown off as well. So ghrelin tells your body that it's hungry, and leptin tells your body that it's full. And oftentimes when insulin levels are too high, we see higher levels of ghrelin and lower levels of leptin. So we can't always say, oh yeah, I'm hungry. Because obviously if you're overweight, you have a lot of weight to lose, you have enough energy to burn, right? It's just tapping into that and using your hormones to your advantage instead of against you. So once those hormonal systems are healed, and intermittent fasting works to heal those systems, you can't necessarily trust it. And I find even with myself, I used to have trouble with wanting to binge when you opened your window, right? Because you're used to eating more often, where now it's like, oh, well, yeah, I'm hungry, but I could go longer without eating if I had to, because my body's truly telling me when it's hungry versus full now. So yeah, all of those hormonal systems just kind of come together and work better when you start to heal that insulin resistance, for sure.
Yeah. And it's just when some of my patients just really latch onto it and they will never eat any other way, like this is the way to do it. I mean, I love the freedom it does give. I know at the front of your book, someone had written a testimonial about the freedom from guilt, freedom from binge eating, freedom from body aches, freedom from packing food for work every day and thinking about food, and freedom from extra weight. And I do think it gives you all of those. I also, one of the things I love about fasting is that for me and for the patients, it did it for me as well. But for the patients, it really helps them make food. There's no good or bad foods. Like I try to help my patients come to a better place with food. Like I'm not finding the word, but the relationship. I like to help them with their relationship with food. And I find that when I'm using intermittent fasting with them, when I first start out with them, I do some basic things like you have done that you mentioned in your book. But I also talk to them about in the beginning, it's just like, especially my patients who have issues around food, is that like just make everything the same. Like there's no good, there's no bad. Just to make everything the same when you first start fasting and just learn how to fast. And then you learn about hunger, like you're saying, you learn your hunger hormones, ghrelin and leptin. And it is true, their leptin just does not work, and especially if they really can't rely on it. Also, too, if they've been overeating, their stomach has stretched, and so they're not even going to feel a sense of satiety and a fullness. And then I keep food kind of out of it in the beginning, especially with my patients who do have issues around the good and bad food and feeling shame around eating certain foods. Because if you make everything neutral and you just focus on the fasting, they lose weight and they start feeling better. And then they're actually more interested and then choosing better choices. But knowing that they can always have the cookie or have the treat that they want or whatever it may be, the French fries, allows them then to have a better relationship with their food. And to me, I think that's one of the benefits of fasting. I don't know if you've seen that, but it definitely has helped. So then therefore it's not special any longer because they can have it during their eating window. But then what ultimately happens is they don't want to have a cookie or French fries every time they have the eating window. And then it just naturally falls off.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely seen that as well. And I know that this happened with myself. It's like, well, if I'm eating 2 meals a day, I want to make everything count. So not only are you craving more satiating foods like healthy fats and natural proteins and higher fiber foods, you want to make them count. And then once you can get past the whole snacking, wanting to snack and needing to eat all the time, most snacks, I'm not going to say all snacks, but most snacks that are in packages are basically like packaged desserts, they're high insulin stimulators. But once you get those out of your diet, or like you said, you just keep them, it's like, okay, well, if I want to have this, I really can have it. Again, it's so mental, like so much of eating is mental. And when you say, okay, I can have that, it takes away the power from that food. But another big strategy that I teach my clients, and they have experimented with this and I've experimented with this, is I teach them to eat a fat or protein first or some sort of vegetable. And if you want to have those starchy foods or the packaged foods or convenience foods, eat them at the end of your meal and butt them up with your meal, so that way your insulin's already stimulated, but not to the degree it would be if you had that food first. And it doesn't wreak as much havoc in your body. So one of the worst things you can do is eat a big meal. And I always tell people this, like, don't save your birthday cake for 2 hours later. Like, eat your meal. And if you want a dessert, eat it at the tail end of your meal and then be done, so that you're not then again stimulating insulin again in an hour or two. And we do everything so backward in our culture. Like we're just snacking all the time. We're eating our desserts right before we go to bed and after we've eaten a big meal. But yeah, if you can butt those foods up that you really, really want, and the cravings do go away over time, just butt them up to the end of your meal. And that will be very helpful overall with keeping the insulin low and keeping the inflammation low. And then you can still enjoy those foods once in a while.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So we learned it a little bit different in our peptide group. We work a lot with peptides, and we have this group of doctors, and we always tell our patients kind of a similar thing that you just said is think about your proteins first, your vegetables second. And then if your carbohydrates that include your bread, your starchy carbs, your dessert, everything, think of those last. So again, so you don't get that insulin spike. And then I love that too. I always tell my patients, if you want whatever it is that you want, that sweet treat, have it with your meal. Make room for it in your meal, because then when you're done, you're done. So it sounds like we definitely are sending the same message to our patients, which is awesome to hear, because I don't think we're the majority. I think we
No,
might be the minority.
I wish we were.
Yes, I wish we were too, but maybe more podcasts like this will help us become the majority. But yeah, it's just wonderful. So, we try to keep our podcast about 30 minutes. I think we're a little bit over. So I wanted to wrap up, and I just wanted, what's the one thing you'd like to share with the listeners, how to reach you if they're interested in finding out more about what you do, and then any last tip you'd like to share with them that can help them on their journey to health and wellness.
Sure. Yeah, my website is fasttoheal.info, and that houses a lot of the information that I share. You can find my book there either digitally or it's sold on Amazon as well. So you can order that through Amazon and that will get you started. I have a podcast called Fast to Heal Stories, and I interview a lot of people who've either gone through my programs or adapted a fasting and lower carb lifestyle and how they did that, and as well as other health practitioners. And then I also have a online program called Finding Nutritional Peace. So that's kind of the subtitle of my book. And you can schedule a free discovery call with me to see if that program is something that you think would be beneficial to you. And yeah, we go from there. I explain a little bit about the program and you can decide. There's group coaching along with that as well. And as far as any last minute tips, I just like people to know, like, fasting and diet, nutrition, activity, sleep, stress, everything is so bio-individual. So you just need to trust your body and do the protocol that feels right for you. And like I said, even maybe you have a sister or somebody who's really close to you, even genetically, who's, like you were mentioning, like you are very different from your sisters. You need to find the protocol that works for you and experiment with you and just go with that and not worry about what other people are doing and what other people are implementing, and just do what feels right for you and your body and makes you feel well. And, we're all striving for longevity, but we want to age well and not just age, right? Like, we want to feel good into our later years. So that would be my last minute advice.
Awesome. Yes. I think that we definitely want to set ourselves up for longevity, but what's the point if you're not feeling great? So I think fasting is a wonderful tool to help you live longer, live well. And as my podcast says, change the way you age. And I definitely think it does change the way you age. So I'm super happy that you were here today, Shana. Thank you so much for your time. And we'll have some of our listeners go on over and see your website, check out your book, and also your online program. So thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Please remember, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not a diagnosis nor a prescription for care. If you are interested in learning more, please go to wisconsinfunctionalmed.com. All one word, wisconsinfunctionalmed.com. Until next time, live well and change the way you age.